the universe is the physical manifestation of nature, and I firmly believe that Bitcoin is its digital manifestation. Bitcoin is a universe in its own right.
That was Hass McCook, also known as Friar Hass, who first came on my radar when I talked to Gigi about his religious experience and his conversations with Hass. Now, this is a very interesting conversation that follows along in the vein of the Bitcoin religion theme that I have been delving into for the past quite a few months. We talk about that topic as well as the, memes and the natural patterns of Bitcoin, as well as a lot of other different things. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this episode. So please stay tuned. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and enjoy this episode. Friar, welcome to the show.
Oh, good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
And, I remember we were talking just a little bit ago, though, but I remember seeing you on Twitter, prior to kind of really getting tuned into you. And then, Bitcoin has kind of brought us together through my conversations with Gigi. And, in my interviews with him, your name kept on coming up as basically this kind of fellow traveler in the, I guess, if you want to put it this way, the kind of Bitcoin mystic space that we kind of seem to be caught up in. But, before we kind of delve down this road, I was wondering how did Bitcoin find you originally?
So, found me by accident, really. I'd heard it mentioned in early 2013 in passing when I was catching up, with drinks with a friend, and he's like, "Oh, have you heard of this Bitcoin thing? It's just hit $200, and they think it's going to be $1,000." I'm like, that sounds good. Tell me about Bitcoin. What's this Bitcoin thing? And he's like, "Oh, I don't know. It's some digital currency." And then the conversation moved away, and that was that. Now, a couple of months later, on summer break, I was at university at the time. Reading the internet, and the name Bitcoin popped up, and looked into it, read the white paper, was completely amazed, completely hooked instantly. And then it was time to try buy some Bitcoin. And I'm being Australian, I was living and studying in England at the time. Wasn't really part of the banking system. The only place selling Bitcoin was this place called like Bitalicious. Apparently they're legit, but back they are, and they're still in business apparently. But back then, you read the name Bitalicious, and it's not really awe-inspiring. So I said, all right, as soon as I get back to Sydney in October, I'll get myself some Bitcoin. So I found a couple of brokers in Sydney. Oddly enough, an alumni from my business school was one of the angels. So I naturally trusted it, and off I went, and that's how my Bitcoin story started. It was quite tragic because most of my buy orders were in that bubble, and I held bags in the red for 1,000 days, and I suppose it's only through real suffering like that can someone find religion. They always say people turn to God in times of tragedy. For me, the times of tragedy reaffirmed and strengthened my views that I'm happy to lose everything for this cause.
Well, just hearing you talk about that, it just reminds me how far we've come over the last 10 years or so, 8-10 years. Thinking about people talking about it at that time, at $100 and $200. The future of money and all this kind of stuff, and you're going, oh yeah, where can I buy that? Oh, at Bitalicious. We've come quite far in how we're able to access the network and be able to interact with it and other people involved. But I totally agree that Bitcoin has, anybody that's been in it for any period of time has experienced that. Now they either do what you did, which is to just hold on and just ride that wave and hope for the best, pray for better times. Or some others just fall off the face of the earth. And I guess to put in that in religious terms as well, they're kind of purified by that crucible of losing faith, and only to come back later and have to make an even greater sacrifice of coming in at a later date. But Bitcoin is definitely, especially these earlier days, has been a just a roller coaster of emotion, especially those first few years that you're in it, just watching and going, well, it went up to this, and just looking at the personal gain, just in those very narrow terms that you could make, and then watching what you'd invested go into about 10% of what it had been prior to that is a bit of a pretty rough experience, especially for most of us. Were pretty young, I imagine. Like you said, you were in school, so you were
I was
probably
in
early
grad
20s.
school, grad
Okay.
school, business school. So late 20s, mid to late 20s. But for me, I always tell people, it's not about the money. It's about the money.
No,
And
absolutely.
and for me, I was more emotionally tied to the investment, and my worldview, and probably you could even say religious view, and philosophical view was in lockstep with Bitcoin. That this could really be the way forward for civilization. This is what we need. As my friend Kayvan Devani always said, the ethical root layer. And when I saw Bitcoin punished by the market, I sort of took that as the world rejecting my worldview. And there was a lot of cognitive dissonance associated with that. And it's only through holding steadfast for a long time can you realize that it's effectively a big exercise in gaslighting people. So for me, it's never been about the money. It's been about the money. It's just a coincidence or a reward that if you put your money where your mouth is and support something, not only will you get the better world that you're looking for, you'll probably be able to enjoy yourself with a bit of riches as well. But for most of the Bitcoiners I know, I'm fairly certain that several of them will be giving away a lot of their stack to worthy charities. I do see the level of ethics and leadership I see just generally in Bitcoin makes me believe that these guys truly are in it for a better world, and they probably won't shy away from their obligations when they become legitimately very wealthy.
Well, to reach back just a second, because you originally, I mean, it was about not the money, but the money at the very beginning of kind of what piqued your interest. And at least what I gathered from your story, it was this kind of going, oh well, this investment before you really discovered Bitcoin, it was what kind of drove you to get into it. Did not knowing your background in your politics, usually it's kind of a taboo subject to ask people what their politics are, but I think in Bitcoin it's a pretty open book for most people. But was that something that you had already kind of embraced? A lot of people were kind of libertarianish, and that's what attracted them to Bitcoin. Is that kind of your story?
So for me, it's a dual thing. So I started my days out as a very idealistic civil engineer. Used to build desal plants, bridges, roads, and I thought that was sort of the best way for me to make my positive impact on society, and not just that, have an impact on millions of people. So in Sydney, we're struggling through a drought now. Our dams are emptying out. The desal plant's pumping hard. So I put my head on my pillow at night saying, I've brought water to a million people. But later in my career, I messed up and got involved in the toll road industry. And when I saw the meeting of finance, politics, and civil infrastructure, I just wanted nothing to do with it anymore, and went off to do some soul searching on how I could have legitimate social impact and leave a positive legacy. So after getting out of the toll road business, I was lucky enough to get into business school at Oxford, which was a life-changing experience. Allowed me to do a lot of soul searching, open my mind, open my heart, and right place, right time on summer break in Oxford, stumbled upon Bitcoin, and I knew right then and there that that's where the proper social impact was going to come from. You fix the money, and everything rolls from there. So I always say, the best thing to be is an economic justice warrior, not a social justice warrior. Because once the economics is fixed, all the social problems fall into line pretty quickly thereafter.
Well, I have to say it's actually quite impressive, because most people, when they're confronted with these types of things that cause a bit of cognitive dissonance, or just the whatever system that they're working within, that it bothers them, or they just go, this isn't how I thought it would be. Most people just kind of go along to get along and just go, well, I just need a paycheck and I'm just going to take it, and then I can go and do something that I care about later in life. So I do have to give you props on that for being able to kind of give up what I imagine was a a good career for yourself, something that paid the bills and
I haven't given it away completely. So I don't work in big civil infrastructure anymore. Now I work for a good family business in the residential construction industry, 3 days a week only though. So that keeps my auto DCA, that keeps my Tithe rolling, and yeah, the rest of the time meditating and writing on Bitcoin.
Well, and to touch on about being, it's about not about the money but the money, just as far as for the profit kind of drive that gets a lot of. I mean, most of us, that's kind of how we first heard about Bitcoin. There's a smaller group that kind of heard about it in kind of fringes of internet culture and chat rooms and libertarian circles, but a lot of us first became aware of it. I was the same way, was that when it started to go up in price, I can't remember what it was in early 2013. I guess it was probably around the same time as you, when it was hitting around $200 or something like that. And
yeah, that was early 2013. That sounds about right. Because when my mate was telling me about it in April, he told me like it had just hit like $250.
Okay.
And yeah, the expectation was it would reach $1,000, and like that was the price target. Seemed ridiculous back then, but yeah, I'd hate to see it go back to 1,000 now.
Well, he wasn't wrong. I mean, we did touch on that pretty briefly. I think it was about 1,200 before Mt. Gox decided to shit the bed and kind of give us all a headache. But I've seen it said by some on Twitter, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, in some sense, that the number go up meme is the most socially scalable meme, and the best evangelization tactic. In that it's kind of a get your foot in the door sort of thing, and that's what me and yourself as well. I mean, that's what got us in, and then led us down this rabbit hole of going, oh, okay, well, yeah, it can make me money, and then okay, well, maybe I should start to understand now that I've just bought $200 or $1,000 of this thing. What is it actually? Then you watch a couple videos on basics of how a blockchain works and what is proof of work mining. And not everybody goes down the road where they continue to go down that rabbit hole and continually discover that they don't understand Bitcoin the more they learn about it. But a good portion of people, or a good minority of people do that. Do you feel that it is the most socially scalable meme and that we should promote that? Or do you think it's something that we should kind of put a little bit farther back and focus on other aspects of Bitcoin ahead of it?
Yeah, look, I'll just comment on what you just said a little earlier about how you get in. My story is a tragedy. So between July, when I found out about it in summer, and between my first purchase in October, I was pretty much reading Bitcoin content for 10 hours a day. I'd seen every video, like I'd seen everything. Like to me, even $1,000 was cheap. I started thinking about, the companies of the time. Snapchat, 50 billion. I'm like, Bitcoin's heaps better than Snapchat. So, there's 10 grand off the bat. Just from and because I was already so deep in before I made my first purchase, basically, like, I was throwing money hand over fist, going all in. My problem was when I started my first purchase, for the protection of their customers, the broker I was using wouldn't let you buy more than 200 a day. So, but every time you put a deposit in your account, like, your daily limit goes up $10. So what I would do is I'd send like $51 transactions a day over internet banking, and I'd go down to the bank every morning with as much cash as I could pull out of an ATM, and split it up into like 50 deposits. So I was trying to get my balance up real quick. So like my first real purchases, the big ones, my all-in purchases were right there at the $1,000 mark. And I thought that, and I thought this is still going at least to 10, 15,000. But yeah, I was horribly wrong, because at the top we got Bitfinex opened and the market for shorting opened, and yeah, party was over.
Yeah, that's quite a few. I imagine in a different scale, that's quite a few people's stories that were. I had people emailing me and contacting me on Facebook, friends that I hadn't talked to in years, and just because I had talked about, Bitcoin and stuff like that in the past, that were emailing me, in October, November of 2017, and going, should I buy this, and should I, buy whatever random coin. Yeah, whatever.
That was one I got asked about. I'm like, I've never even heard of it.
Well, that's another. Well, I've been doing a whole kind of background research on their whole thing around the Pornhub partnership that I think I'm almost finished with. I'm just waiting to hear a little bit back from some of the people at Ledger about it, and their so-called integration that's never happened, and that's a very interesting tale about Verge and their whole thing. But yeah, that was it's the most private coin in the world, right?
I don't know. Still, I've heard of it, but now that I've heard of it, never looked into it. So I'm a Bitcoin fundamentalist.
Yeah, no, and I do have to ask you, because the downside of like Twitter and all social, it's very hard to ever discern intent as well as tone, right? All you can read is just the written word, and I'm pretty sure I already kind of know your answer to this, but it can seem at times that you're being a bit facetious, right? So like a lot of times you do your common greeting, of the keys be upon you, and then other tweets you're providing some really deep insight into kind of the I guess if you want to call it the spiritual side, right, of Bitcoin, especially just listen to Gigi talk about your guys' talk at the Baltic Honey Badger. It was Baltic Honey Badger, right? Yeah, and I do have to ask, how much of your personality on Twitter is facetious versus being versus serious, or is it just kind of cloaking seriousness and kind of just a fun, jokey tone?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of fun that everyone can enjoy. I've always been that guy in the room that everyone's afraid to say it, but I'll put my hand up and say it. And I think what's it called? There's just been a huge religious, organic, quote unquote religious movement come through the past few months, and I think the roots of that always come, from comedic little memes that catch on. But I'd say probably 80% having fun, 20% being serious, because Bitcoin really is something very extremely spiritual to me.
Well, if you don't mind going into that, what is it about Bitcoin that touched you in the way? Because I've heard you talk about, I can't remember what exact interview it was, where you basically explained that you're not a religious person as far as in the traditional sense. So what was it about Bitcoin that kind of awakened this aspect in your life, and how do you in the seriousness and in the 20% side of yourself, how do you actually, I guess, practice that, and kind of how does that manifest in your life?
So so for me, I'd been in Bitcoin for a while before I had my come to Bitcoin spiritual moment. That happened I was on holiday back at Oxford in 2016. I wrote my story as the forward to Gigi's book, actually. So I was sitting in my college, Christchurch, in a garden that's called the Masters Garden there in the college, and Lewis Carroll was a math tutor at Christchurch at my college, and Alice was the dean's daughter. And Lewis Carroll wrote Alice in Wonderland, observing Alice play in the Masters Garden. So it was late at night. I was in a sort of somber mood. I was trying to recover, some money, and I had money on Bitfinex. I was in an underwater long, and then Bitfinex got hacked, and my physician got forced closed. And I took a haircut, and it was just bad news after bad news after bad news, being in the red for 3 years. So we're sitting in the bench, clear black sky, maybe 1 or 2 a.m., a little under the influence, and looked up at the night sky, and looked at one particular star caught my attention, and I just felt like I zoomed into that star, got really up close and personal. In that star, I did see Bitcoin, and that's when it all connected to me that Bitcoin is simply an extension of nature, and effectively Bitcoin is life at the deep down, metaphysical, spiritual level. So what I mean by Bitcoin is life. The only thing that can mimic and represent energy is Bitcoin itself. So all of the energy in the universe is finite, but it's infinitely divisible and transferable, exactly like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is simply the conversion of energy into money. So Bitcoin's effectively monetized energy. If everything in nature is energy, then everything in nature can potentially be Bitcoin in a digital manifestation. So I think the perfection of its ties to nature, that in its own right is something extremely spiritual, especially for naturists. Me, I sort of kept sort of a Taoist discipline for a good 6 or 7 years before coming to Bitcoin, and the Tao is basically the acceptance of nature's will, and the submission to it. It's something you can't fight and hope to win. All you can do is, build a raft and try to sail down its rivers. And I don't think there's a better analogy for that than Bitcoin.
Yeah, it is interesting because one of the things I'd studied permaculture for quite a few years. I don't know if you're familiar with it at all. Its roots are actually in Australia. Bill Mollison, kind of the progenitor of permaculture, or at least kind of who codified kind of the tenets of it, and which is basically just interactive systems. Most often, people use it for natural systems, things like gardens and food forests and food production, but integrating animals and all, basically anything that you can imagine in the natural space to improve both the production and the health of that system.
A lot of that comes from the indigenous teachings.
Okay.
And the indigenous religion. Well, I heard your episode with Giacomo, and obviously you can define religion in various ways, but the spiritual aspects and traditions of the indigenous Australians, very, very interesting, and permaculture and letting nature sort itself out for best results is a very, very huge part of culture. So I'm not surprised that permaculture is being pioneered here in Australia.
Yeah, well, one of the things that they teach you in there is pattern recognition, right? Is recognizing patterns in nature, and which also, moves on into other spaces, whether you're in business or kind of observing culture and society, is you can start to observe, and once you start to look for patterns, you start to see them all over the place. And that's one of the things as I started to look at Bitcoin, and just is a basic topography of it, is it the close resemblance to like mycelial, mushroom and fungi networks, and just the organic growth of the network across the world. It's so, if you look at when they do the visualizations of it, it just so closely resembles these types of things. And I've been doing a lot more research into things like slime molds and just the kind of the collective intelligence of ants, and Bitcoin's very much like that. It's this collective intelligence of tens of thousands of millions of people that are kind of moving the network. It's just not, we a lot of times we focus on the technology, the consensus mechanism, right? But all that really does is just kind of mimic nature. Anything that doesn't mimic nature, you constantly have to fight to make it work. And things that naturally flow with nature and flow in natural patterns tend to be able to be much smoother. And I think that's why previous versions of digital currencies did not work and where Bitcoin did, because it started to recognize the natural flows in humanity and nature, such as the game theory that Satoshi introduced on top of proof of work. And as you said, it basically taking energy, which is everything, can be converted into energy, and using that for proof of work. It just, once I started to look at that, it was just a very it's a beautiful system when you really start to kind of look beyond just RAM chips and processors and ASICs and all that kind of stuff.
Another way I put it, because I know everyone likes sound bites, but basically the universe is the physical manifestation of nature. And I firmly believe that Bitcoin is its digital manifestation. So Bitcoin is a universe in its own right.
Oh, absolutely. Gigi's written about this as well, as kind of it creates its own gravity, where it pulls individuals into it, and once you kind of embrace that pull, I think it makes your transition into it much, much easier. And going back to the religious aspect of it. You talked about your kind of conversion experience and how it affects in your daily life. But every religion, whether it's animalistic, very early prehistoric, or kind of the modern incarnations of it, they all have sets of rituals that develop, right? And these sorts of rituals help to reveal truths of that religion and their teachings. And they do that because at first people are just trying to figure out whatever it is that has been discovered, and then rituals end up getting used to a lot of times just focus people on what it is that they're trying to get out of that experience, and as well as form a community, right? And the stronger communities means a stronger faith and the ability to spread that. But I was wondering, how do you see what the rituals of Bitcoin are, whether they're major or minor, or if you want to phrase them as sacraments of it. But how do you view those as kind of developing or have developed within Bitcoin?
So for about the past year and a half, I've been banging on about the concept of the tithe. Now, several religions have the tithe. I think all of the major Abrahamic religions do: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. In different ways and forms, but effectively, it's giving a fixed portion of your income to the church, to further the church's mission. And I think the best the thing to do, what people can do to further Bitcoin's mission, is the tithe. So every week, every paycheck, whatever it is, set aside a fixed percentage of your income, and go from there. But up until recently, that's been very difficult to do, namely because of the unfortunate nature of human psychology. So it's easy enough to say that, yep, this week I'm going to put $100 a week into Bitcoin. This week, $100. You open your exchange account on Monday. You've seen that the price has dipped 5%, and you say, you know what, I'll buy tomorrow. And tomorrow comes, and say, you know what, I'll buy tomorrow. And then days go past. You miss your opportunity. You buy back in later. There's always elements of human psychology that stop you hitting the button. Now, one thing that's evolved out of the community, and I like to think it's the noise that I made hopefully played some part in this, but there's been an evolution towards the auto DCA functionality. So over the past 3 or 4 months, a lot of new companies have either popped up, or old companies have changed their business models to allow people to do a set and forget recurring DCA, which is effectively their tithe. Now, why is this such an important sacrament? A lot of people have the utopic vision of Bitcoin will free disadvantaged Africans and Indians and Southeast Asians, and they'll have circular economies, and everyone will get paid in Bitcoin, the whole supply chain, blah 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 blah. But if Bitcoin's only worth $10,000, it's not very useful for anything. It's way too volatile. Currently at the moment, inflation is still quite high. A lot of people say, what do you mean inflation's high? But, every day, 1,800 Bitcoins still need to be absorbed. But if you are a regular tither, whether that's hourly, so there's a new company I learned off yesterday. I think it's called SparkSwap, allows you to do hourly DCA into Bitcoin. A lot of other services obviously allow daily, weekly, fortnightly, monthly, quarterly, whatever you like. Now, I've got another catchphrase. If you want the price to be stable, you got to put your nuts on the table. So all of us Bitcoiners, if we want the price to stable and have a firm, solid floor that inclines, slopes up over the long term as more tithers jump on board, Bitcoin's never going to succeed and never going to be stable. So I think probably the main religious duty that the Bitcoiner has, because look, if you can't just beat about it, you got to be about it. So if you're taking the moral stance that you want to take down the fiat system, you want to be a revolutionary, and you're not willing to put up 10% of your income to opt out of the system, what are you here for? Where's your skin in the game? For me, Bitcoin's always been a moral imperative, and basically 100% of my disposable income goes into stacking. So I'm a daily stacker, and I'm still happy for Bitcoin to go to zero because I've dug my heels in. I'm taking a moral stance, and Bitcoin being the greatest charity humanity has ever seen, I'm going to keep supporting this charity so that it realizes its full potential.
Well, it's interesting you talk about skin in the game, because that's something that I think that often gets overlooked, because you look at the criticisms of the so-called toxicity, especially in Bitcoin and Bitcoin maximalists, right? Of it's so toxic. Individuals who want to a lot of people in other projects or iterations or people that don't understand, we'll talk about, well, we don't really have a beef with you in Bitcoin. We just want to build this thing, this token that you can use to trade to turn in for cows, or whatever at the end of the slaughter season or whatever it may be, right? And I really don't have any faith whatsoever in the short term you're talking about, because there's always going to be competition against Bitcoin, because there's never an end point to this game where there's not people or individuals who think that they can do something better and are going to
so this is the analogy I use. So basically right now we're currently fighting the biggest war of good versus evil humanity has ever witnessed. Good, clean, pure money versus evil money. Right? We're starting off as revolutionaries. We got all kinds of people involved in our volunteer army. We got developers who we'll call weapons developers, right? Defensive technology, offensive technology, all of that kind of stuff. You've got your chaplains and friars like me, boosting morale. And for the people that can't contribute to the attack and defense capabilities, we can go into our big sand pit, fill up sandbags, and start building up a base. And over time, our weapons are getting stronger, our defenses are getting stronger. We're starting to make good headway into enemy territory in our fight. And as we're trying to fill up our sandbags, there are shitcoiners in the sandpit building sandcastles, and we just want them to get the hell out of our way, let us win this war, and then they can come back and play in the sand. So that's how I look at them. I don't see them as competition at all. I just see them as a big pain in the ass nuisance that's delaying our war effort.
Yeah, no. By competition, I just mean people that are going to, say that they can do it better, right? And in a way, whether or not that has any real ability to do so, it's still, I guess you would say, they're competing for the same hearts and minds that we are, and just kind of, as you said, slowing down that progress. But and I see this a lot, like within Ethereum, or the other, whatever you want to call it, world computer-ish, Ethereum killers, whatever you want to call those types of folks. But I see a lot of more of that talk of live and let live coming from them. And to me, that just signals especially that they have an even weaker position than they think. Because if where the toxicity comes from is it's a defense mechanism within the organism, right? Of the white blood cells of trying to get these things out of, like, for using your analogy, get them out of the sandbox. And if you don't even have enough passion where you don't view Bitcoin as being something that you're competing against or trying to upend, that I just don't see any kind of future for you. This is Litecoin, right? Litecoin's a great example where they are constantly, anybody you talk to, well, we're not trying to defeat Bitcoin. We're not trying to replace Bitcoin. We're complementary to it. And, that to me, if that's your main talking point is, well, we just kind of want to coexist at a lower level than you. And we just want to help you out. It just says to me that you have no passion and you have no faith in what you're trying to promote. And you're just, defending this empty carcass of a thing and trying to pretend like it's still alive.
Look, I'll also play cynic here. A lot of these developers, especially the new ones that came about in 2017, if they probably enter the mindset, if I'm not already here with bags, why should I contribute freely and voluntarily to an open source ecosystem where even if my developments help pump the price of Bitcoin, I don't have enough bags for it to matter. So let me just create my own shitcoin, pre-mine it, and sell it to stupid people. So I'm of the camp that every single developer not working on Bitcoin is a scammer.
Well, I was just talking.
So I'll take the hardline approach.
Yeah, no, and I don't disagree with the sentiment. I do think I talked to Giacomo about this offline. It wasn't in the episode. And then I was talking to another individual, and he's not a Bitcoiner. He's is aware of it, and he's kind of read a little bit about it, but the interview that I did before, and he was talking about the use of the word scam. And, I talked to Giacomo about that as well. As I don't think it's necessarily wrong to call those things scams, but I do think that in a way we end up overusing it in the way that, racism has been overused, where racism now, or racist by certain elements of society, and calling somebody else that, they basically, what they mean is, you don't agree with me. And now you are that. And it's been overused, in my opinion, to the point where now when it's used against actual people who fit that description, it has a lot less bite. And I do think there's a differentiation in an aspect, or in a certain way, of people who, something like, let's say, OneCoin is probably the biggest example of a true total scam. They didn't even have even an attempt to make a blockchain. It was just a SQL database that they had, and probably still do. And all they were doing...
People are still buying OneCoin.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact.
Now that they've been kicked out of it's sad. One of the... well, they're targeting people in the third world, saying, hey, Bitcoin, and they use the name of Bitcoin, of saying, hey, wouldn't you have loved to get into Bitcoin when it was $1, and now it's, $10,000, or, back in 2017, it's $15,000, $20,000 now. And using that as a way just to steal, the poorest of the poor of the world's, few pieces of, few coins that they can, rub together. But, that's a genuine total scam. Whereas there are, I'm not for those projects, but I do think that there are some people out there who are completely misguided. They either don't realize that what they're going to do, or what they're trying to do, either can't work, or there's no way that it can survive Bitcoin, and what Bitcoin's going to just replace any kind of functionality that they may ever be able to offer. But I was just wondering, do you think, having taken that hard line, do you think that there's any danger in saturating the space with the word scam, and and then it's much more difficult for people if they hear that when they first get into this space. Everything's a scam, and then they really go, well, this does actually make sense, and I'm just not going to believe anything that they say about any real scam or any one coin true scam. I'm just wondering if you think that there's any danger in doing that.
Look, yes and no. So me, just at a personal, ethical level, and I'd imagine a lot of Bitcoiners share the same sentiment, because a lot of us are here for the exact same reason, is looking after the little guy and protecting the weak. So it's a natural reaction to call these things out, especially if you've spent some considerable time in the space. So for guys like you and I, we've seen every single shitcoin come and go. The ones that haven't went yet are down 95%, and the only reason they're not gone yet is because they're still profitable for shitcoin casinos and aren't going to get delisted anytime soon. So maybe the word scam is a little bit confrontational, but sometimes you need that aggressive word to trigger that response that might get several like onlookers. Just if the word scam triggers them to the point where they go to Google and type in, is XX shitcoin a scam, and uncover a page of thorough reviews, debunking their particular business model and all that kind of stuff, I think that can only be a positive thing. Now, unfortunately, a lot of scam coins spend a lot on SEO, and the front page of the search engine will be filled with fluff pieces. But all one can do is warn and advise, and it all boils down to do your own research, take your own risks. But none of us want to see people get wrecked by scammers. A lot of us pray for a soft landing, so that's why we're kind of, or at least I'm happy that there's basically zero institutional interest in Bitcoin right now. That gives the little guy a bit more of a chance to accumulate on the cheap. So that's just my natural. That's just how I am personally. I don't like seeing people get wrecked, because I've seen in the past, wreckage causes deaths. It's something that's not really discussed much in the crypto world, but the amount of suicides in a bear market is horrendous. You read several cases, but it's just not something that's discussed. Financial ruin, ruins everything. So that's why, sort of deep down in our hearts, we just don't want anyone to get wrecked by these people, and also we don't want to see scammers get rich off the wreckage of others.
No, absolutely. I remember there's that scene in The Big Short. I don't know if you've seen that movie about the 2008 financial crisis, where Brad Pitt's character, and they were really excited. The two guys, the younger guys, that they just were able to purchase basically these shorts on a bunch of these. I can't remember the tranches of these housing loans. And they were really, really excited. And Brad Pitt stopped them, and he was talking about, like, if we're right, this is going to be a financial collapse that we haven't seen. At that point, they didn't know if this was going to take down the whole system at all. But he talked about the statistic of, for every 1% that unemployment goes down or goes up, 40,000 people die. And now we haven't reached that level with Bitcoin where we're talking about those types of levels yet. But I mean, just statistically, it's going to affect people at a much lower rate, but it does. And as far as for philosophically, I completely agree with you, because we are, as far as for these things being scams, because what we're trying to do is enable sovereignty of the individual at a level that we previously hadn't thought possible before Bitcoin. and the internet age, which enabled Bitcoin to jump onto the world stage. And anything that is slowing that progress down, or retarding the effect of Bitcoin's adoption, is, I think, falls into that level of, maybe not calling everything a scam, but definitely being a enemy of people's sovereignty, which is the most important aspect and the most important principle, I think, that we can push forward.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And look, eventually, like, I think all of us fundies have enough faith in Bitcoin. Like, we know it's going to be the only one. It's just a matter of when, really. And I really do wish that a lot of these casinos, at least the industry leaders, grow a bit of spine, and just keep their books to maybe 10 or 15 shit coins. You don't need to list 150 of them. Stop giving these basically wealth transfer mechanisms, transfer from retail to pre-miners. Just stop giving them any means to rob people.
In talking about the Bitcoin developing this religion, this spirituality around it, it isn't, I mentioned Ethereum and them as not really having that same level of passion to the level that you see within Bitcoin, but we do see different projects, I guess, if you want to call them that, starting as well to exhibit some signs. But most of these really just revolve around a cult of personality, right? So you see Justin Sun with Tron, Vitalik with Ethereum. BSV is probably being the most stark example of a cult of personality, and I would call that it does have the same a lot of the same types of attributes that we see within a religion, but it's much more precipitous in that when it's around a individual versus a set of principles, then it's much more prone to failing, especially once that individual dies, right? But in your opinion and in your experience as well, what do you think that makes Bitcoin different and more resilient than these, not the technology or scaling solutions or whatever, but really the philosophy and the I guess the brethren, the people that are participating in it?
So for me, the main one is, if it doesn't exist in nature, it can't exist in Bitcoin, and that's the winning combo. So Bitcoin's extremely organic, and if you look at a lot of these altcoin projects and smart smart contract platforms, or whatever it is, not all of them seem very natural or organic. So they're just destined to fail, as things that have been unnatural and unorganic have failed for billions of years before us.
And it was that I'm sorry, but I forget that interview that I just recently, I think it was last week, I was listening to it, and I can't remember what it was, but you were talking about the same subject, about the Bitcoin religion and everything, but you'd couch that term when you were talking with the hosts and to the audience as well, that it's not like a traditional religion, but kind of more secular. And I was wondering, what do you mean by that, as well as the kind of this impulse to discount, I guess you'd say, more traditional supernatural religions, in a way that as though it had better trade-off or worse trade-offs than, say, a secular religion does. Because in the way that I view, over time we've just replaced traditional supernatural religions in especially Western society with very more secular ones, politics, group identity, and tribalism as well. But I was just wondering, both of why you feel that Bitcoin is more secular than supernatural, and why you have a I don't want to say put words in your mouth and saying an aversion, but somewhere along that line.
So for me, actually, you could sub the word religion for philosophy. I consider those two words interchangeable, and holding the Bitcoin secular philosophy and a traditional religious philosophy aren't necessarily mutually exclusive for a lot of people. Now, where the secular aspect of Bitcoin comes in is that you don't have to believe anything. You have to believe in something, but you don't have to believe anything because there's no belief required. Everything's verifiable, everything's transparent, but you have to believe in the philosophy of, hard money and everything that rolls on from hard money. And effectively, the difference, the contrast to that in the traditional religions is you need to believe in a deity and then also believe in the scripture. So there's the contrast. So Bitcoin doesn't require belief about something, but belief in something. Particularly the philosophy effectively of Austrian economics and libertarianism. But Bitcoin is politically agnostic, and if communists want to use Bitcoin, Bitcoin's also for communists. In a world where Bitcoin takes over, there's nothing to stop communists forming a commune and bootstrapping their circular economy with Bitcoin. And that's really what makes it so special. Like Bitcoin is money for enemies. Any philosophy can adopt it and benefit from it.
Well, yeah, I'd actually done a while back. I did an interview with BTC Socialist. I don't know if you've probably seen him on Twitter, and he does a lot of stuff on Lightning. And it was really interesting to hear because it was, for the most part, although he disagreed with the fact that most early Bitcoiners were libertarians, and that could be true, mostly just because that's where I came from, and that's most of the people that I talked to at that time. And he's not necessarily wrong in that there were Amir Taki. I mean, he's I believe kind of falls along that line as well, and it is a really interesting thing in that. Yeah, I mean, if you do want whatever political system you want to have, you can use Bitcoin, freely. There's nobody that's going to censor your ability and your group's ability to, access the network to be able to transfer, UTXO sets amongst yourselves, and any more than it would be for the most voluntarist society that existed right next door.
But look, also going back to that, a lot of these days socialists don't even know what they want. So a major aspect of the socialist philosophy is social justice and injustice, and a lot of them hate capitalism. But what we see today is it's not capitalism. It's not true. It's a big straw man that they're attacking. What we have today is corporatism and Keynesianism. So it's effectively what happens is, Cantillon effect. Rich get all the money. Rich can, spend that money on evil pursuits. Government reprints the money, gives it back to the rich. In a Bitcoin world, this just simply isn't possible. Even the Winklevi, they got 250,000 Bitcoin or whatever it is. Once the Bitcoin's spent, it's gone. You need to re-earn it. So over time, the global wealth distribution, and I can see this happening over the period of 100 to 150 years. Sounds like a long time, but it's a fart in the scheme of human civilization. But I really do believe we'll see a normal distribution of wealth in the world, where you have a very big, heavy middle class concentrated around the mean. You've got obviously your ultra wealthy tails on one side, a couple of standard deviations away, and then unfortunately you still have the ultra poor in the tail on the other end. And I think there'll be enough to go around where the ultra rich can support the ultra poor, and the middle class is also strong enough to a high degree of that economic burden as well. So they say who's gonna build the roads, who's gonna look after social security. I think once the normal distribution is approved, or not approved, is realized, I think a lot of these problems and motivations for socialism and communism will go away.
Well, and through the mechanism of the markets and true free market capitalism, we will see that distribution. I mean, we've already seen it, even as bad as the interjections into the markets with Keynesians in the West. The fragments of the markets that are allowed to operate, whether we're talking about the West or the opening of the markets in China, back in the 70s and the 80s and up through today. And while they're not as free as we are, that opening of markets and through the mechanism of the free markets, we have seen. You're always going to have people on the bottom end of the spectrum because you're not going to have a vertical group. But
I'll tell you why that is because this is nature.
Yeah.
Like, it's very rare in a population to see perfect everything, a solid line, everyone's average. There's always some form of normal distribution where you have the fittest, the weakest, and then the middle of the population.
Mm-hmm.
So if it doesn't exist in nature, it can't exist in Bitcoin.
And what I was getting at is that what these mechanisms do is they actually drag that the whole scale, because they talk about the rich getting richer, but nobody talks about how the poor are getting richer. We've seen over the last decade, we've seen the population of in the entire globe, the global population. We had 30% 10 years ago of people lived in what is defined, like, I don't know whose metric, or whether this is the UN or the OEDCP, but it's about 30% of the population lived in poverty in the globe. And over the last 10 years, not in the last 100 or 1,000 years, we've seen that shrink from 30% to, I believe it was 14 or 17%, which is amazing. I mean, that itself is just a miracle. And so when we talk about, in the Bitcoin future, there's still going to be poor people. It's like, but those poor people are still going to be way better off than they were, decades or centuries prior. So
agree, but the people lobbying hardest for socialism aren't those effectively the up and coming unemployed barista in Oregon doesn't care about the people living on $1 a day. He cares about why he's so disadvantaged in a rich country like America. And that's where I think Bitcoin comes in more to the universal scale, because what works on $5 a day in one place doesn't work on $5 a day in another. So that's another problem in its own right, and that's one of those wait and see things to just see how it's gonna materialize. But with Bitcoin, circular economies, and a capped currency, we're gonna see a huge shift from the right tail back into the left. So I can expect the poor to get far richer in a short period of time, maybe 100 years. I could see Bitcoin eliminating poverty in 100 years. Eliminating desperate poverty.
Yeah.
In less than 100 years, maybe 50 years.
Yeah, when we're talking about true poverty, where you're living on $2 to $3 a day versus I have to have a a 2005 Honda Civic. I think that there's a big difference, and really when you talk about in the West, when we're talking about people advocating for socialism in the West, I mean, if you really look at it, that is to use their term, there's the only way that you're able to do that is because you come from a position of privilege globally. to yeah, to be able to look at all these gains that we have, and all, just the massive leaps that we've gone forward, and to look at that, and then to be able to say, well, I'm still not at that farthest right spectrum, and so I think that I just want to tear everything all down. Screw all the people on the, because at the end of the day, that's what they're doing. If you want to eliminate free markets, you are screwing all the people on the left side of the spectrum, because you want to move to the right a little bit and take all the people from the right and drag them to the left. And that's just an immense position of privilege historically, to be able to look at the system that we have now that has done so much, and to say, well, you know what, I think that I'll actually I'll be better off. My circumstances will be better off if we just tear this whole thing down, and we'll just see what all happens.
The biggest trick the devil played was convincing people that corporatism was capitalism. And I can definitely understand the anger of the socialists, but they're misdirecting their anger. Their anger should be aimed elsewhere, namely the Fed. Yeah, so effectively, the way I see it is the Federal Reserve, the fractional reserve system is so difficult to understand, and it's offensive, and when you explain it to people, they just don't believe you. They're like, works, it can't. Like, who let this happen? So just breaking through that wall, that all of their concerns and problems can effectively be fixed by turning the printers off.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, I mean, they understand this concept of, people who have political connections, right, have the ability to improve their circumstances at a much better rate, and exponentially, compared to some guy who's making 40 to 50,000 US dollars a year, right? Or a roughly middle class, middle of the road job, compared to somebody who's got enough money to be able to make maximum donations to a politician. They understand that, but a lot of people just don't understand this concept of the way the central banks work. And the closer you are to the creation of money, right, which is the central banks, and their printing endlessly of their fiat currency, the cheaper that money is. And that's how they're able to get $1 million, let's just say, at 2.3%, and then loan it out for 3.6 or 10% or whatever it may be, depending on whatever loan we're talking about. And I mean, that's just a license to print money. I mean, I would love to be able to just go to the Fed and say, I'd like to get $1 million at 2.3%, and then I could go out and go loan that money out and make my 1 or 2% off that as well. But you can't. You have to be in a privileged position within that system to be able to do that, and it's protected specifically to do that. And to be somewhat fair within Bitcoin, the closer you are to the production of Bitcoin, there is a small premium, compared to what the miners are, because they have to. They're either selling at cost or a little bit above, and some a little bit more if you want to get really clean Bitcoin too. So there is that slight premium, but nowhere near the same level of corruption and inefficiency that you see within central banks. And I think that go ahead.
The Bitcoin mining industry is extremely efficient. The competition is the competition in the Bitcoin market is probably the fiercest competition you will ever witness. So in Econ 101, we all learn about perfect competition, because it's just the easiest way to explain competition, because it's like, you free yourself of all externalities. You just focus on, let's pretend that, all products are identical. Let's pretend that you can, move the products around all over the world, low barriers to entry and exit, yada, yada, yada. Bitcoin mining is effectively an example of perfect competition. So So they might make premiums here and there during bulls, especially during bull markets. But all of that profit is hard earned. There's very little rent seeking within the mining industry. It's difficult to seek rent, whereas the banking system is effectively a system built on rent seeking. Borrow from the Fed at 2, loan out at 3.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I wasn't trying to insinuate that they're Bitcoin miners are selling these things off at 10% because they can't, and that's the one thing I've always really loved as well about Bitcoin, as far as from a free market perspective, is the signals that the network sends is very pure, and the signals and like you said, the competition is cutthroat, and the signals that you see coming from miners is really clear. I mean, like you see as well right now, the hash rate is at all-time highs, as well as these massive mining facilities that you see being built in Texas and other parts of the world. You're seeing Russia. I believe it was in Russia. There's a couple spots where they're renting out areas for data centers and Bitcoin miners, and these investments that they're making are not small at all, and the signals that they send out by doing that is very clear. Of course, we can't know the future 100%, but they are also they do mine at times, or for quite a bit of the last few years, at times at losses. So the premiums, absolutely, as you said, the premiums that they do charge in bull markets are often quite offset by the losses that they will entail during periods of low price.
And look, a lot of these periods of low price don't realistically last that long. And a lot of miners, what people overlook is that a miner doesn't have to pay their energy bill every day. A lot of these guys are on quarterly terms, so like they can rough out 3 months before an electricity bill is due. And some of these mining companies have investors that are in the game, so they can get their hands on virgin coins. Or they want they want big exposure to Bitcoin over the long term. So let's say I have $500 million and I want to buy some Bitcoin. To not cause craziness in the market, I might throw 200 million down and start a mine in a place with cheap electricity. And as I buy more rigs and pay my electricity bills, I eventually get my $500 million exposure to Bitcoin, potentially at a good profit as well, or rather at a good discount from spot. So like it's difficult to take mining as a monolithic entity, because every miner just has such different goals. Eventually, obviously, the end goal is profitability, but there's also every company has its own risk profile and profit maximization targets, and they don't always have to be rational. Some people would be happy to mine at a loss just to get their hands on virgin coins.
And actually, I wanted to jump back just a second, because to something that you were saying earlier. I forgot to ask you that when you were talking about traditional religions and the supernatural aspect of it, is that Bitcoin doesn't require you to believe something, but believe in something. And I was wondering, as far as, because we talked a little bit earlier as well about when we were speaking on shitcoins, is that we do know that Bitcoin is going to win out in the end. And would you maybe classify that a bit as belief, or a belief in kind of this future that we don't know quite yet, because you can never account for every single variable that could happen, and that it is a belief in Bitcoin ultimately winning, somewhat of a belief of something versus in a philosophy?
So effectively, what Bitcoin's finally given us the chance to do is back our philosophy with money. So a lot of people like, oh, I want to, whatever it is, save the rainforest or whatever that is. Yeah, a lot of people can talk about saving the rainforest, but the only way to the rainforests are going to be saved is through the exertion of energy. And Gigi always says everything in the world, flipping zeros to ones, needs energy. And the energy that goes into saving the rainforests, effectively you can substitute energy for money. So if you envisage a world with thriving rainforests, you got to put your money where the mouth is, and you gotta spend money on saving the rainforests. Exact same thing with Bitcoin. You want a libertarian, free, self-sovereign future, limited government control. No one's going to deliver that to you but yourself. So if you want to, see your worldview materialize, and you think it's the correct worldview, bet on it. Let's have a bet.
In that way, because you were talking at the very beginning about your sitting on these massive being in the red from your early purchases, and really up until probably
very late 2016.
Yeah.
So from late 2013 to late 2016, a little earlier than 2016, the end, because I was averaging down, but yeah, roughly 1,000 days. So like 2 3/4 years.
Yeah, and to me, that's another aspect that closely mimics religion, is that it requires that, as you said, as in at the very beginning, and that it requires a sacrifice, right?
The exile in the desert.
Yeah, yeah, and with putting your money where your mouth is, and being able to basically bet by your tithe, bet by your sacrifice of, you could have went and bought a nicer car, you could have went and bought a new TV or gone on that vacation, but instead you decided to basically sacrifice to the network your a portion of the value that you hold right now to that network. In basically in a tithe of support for a better future for the believers.
Yeah, absolutely right. I've always been a man that loves to have a bet. That's that's effectively how people get wealthy. They form a hypothesis about something. They back it with their money, and if their hypothesis is correct, they get wealthy. Whether you're a stock investor, a real estate investor, a business person, it always comes down to viewing a risk and rolling the dice on that risk. So for me, I'm rolling the dice that we're going to have a fair world in the future. And if my dice roll is wrong, well, sucks for humanity, doesn't it?
Well, and going back to the philosophy of this and kind of your own personal experience, I would say probably America has probably the largest, not only group of, but probably per capita of people that are within kind of this libertarian sphere of, very, if you want to give it a broad big tent definition. And when I was talking to Max Hillebrand a couple of weeks ago, I asked him about what it was like for him being in Europe, being someone that believed in Austrian economics and kind of the libertarian ideals of, the sovereignty of the individual above the group, or just not the group being the most, the good of all being the most important ethos versus the good of yourself as an individual, and that being kind of a very sovereign thing. What is, and you're the first person I've talked to on an interview, being from Australia, and I was just wondering, what is kind of the state of the ethos of libertarianism and Austrian economics within Australia? Is it enough where you have a community of like-minded people that you kind of can turn to? I imagine in Sydney it's a lot better than, say, being in a smaller area of Australia, but I was just wondering what the health of the individual sovereign is in Australia, and what that was like for you. Was it lonely?
Oh, it's pretty poor actually. We're one of the biggest nanny states in the world, I'd say. But we do have a good crop of libertarian kids. So I've managed to hang out in libertarian circles, since I was in my early 20s. And there's a lot of kids that are keen on liberty. But in terms of it's sometimes very demoralizing to live in Australia uh, because of the extent of the nanny state. Like, we have these encryption laws which force all companies to create secret backdoors in their products for the government to use, and whistleblowers will go to jail for if they talk about their backdoors. We're effectively the used as a tool by the Five Eyes intelligence agencies to effectively spy on the world. Australia is a bit of a disaster when it comes to liberty, and that's why there's so many Aussie Bitcoiners. We're putting our money where our mouth is and saying we're not going to stand for this nanny state crap anymore. And our vision of the future is to escape the nanny state. And Aussies, we love a bet. We bet on anything, and I think this is the most honourable bet we can take. And in my view, it's almost a no-risk bet.
And kind of continuing on that line of, I'm just wondering because Australia and America kind of have a very common ancestry, right? So we both originated out of the British Empire, and yourselves and Canada are much closer to that than we were with a full break. But I'm wondering, why do you think that they're, and it's diminishing by the day in America, it seems, but why do you think that there's a heartier reverence for kind of the individual liberty in America versus, say, Australia or Canada? Because the Australian people that, this is very subjective, but that I've met, it just seems like it's a place where people are a lot more, and this is not in a pejorative sense, but a lot more rough. Yeah, but also not as sensitive, I guess, as Americans have come to be about, whether it's, just kind of rougher conversations as far as for not being as offended by, coarser language and things like that. Where in America, that's, it's not that you don't find that, but generally speaking, I find that that Aussies are much more okay with someone being a little bit more rough around the edges and how they talk and interact with each other.
Yeah, we're losing it though. People have lost their minds in the Trump era. So we have the SJW sickness has started to infiltrate the Australian airwaves. A lot more people are getting offended about everything. So we used to be rough. They call us fair dinkum. We call things as we see them. We're not afraid to offend people. Very, very real. But at the same time, Australia doesn't have a Bill of Rights. And I think America is the second greatest idea in history. The idea of America, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment. These are all, I think, when looked at in totality, the second greatest idea in history. And I think they're deviating from that idea quite a bit, and I hope they can revert to it without any violence. I've been monitoring the situation in Virginia with a lot of interest, and that'll be a great litmus test to see if the Americans are going to stand for getting their rights taken away.
Yeah, that is very interesting, because I do see it as a test case for other states as well, because it's not, Virginia is not a totally blue or red state. It depends on where you go. If you look at all the counties together, I mean, it's very purple. It goes either way in a lot of ways, but it also does there's a lot of rural communities, and the more rural you get, the more protective of their rights as far as for the Second Amendment goes. So that'll be very interesting to see how that goes. Because you guys in Australia, I think, was it back in the 80s, was when you lost the majority of your rights, and that, like you said, you don't have a bill. Was it
Yeah,
early
early
90s?
90s.
Okay,
But yeah, we don't have a Bill of Rights.
that's very interesting.
Yeah. So, but we're super chill. Like the weather's always great. Uh, Actually, we've been on fire for the last couple of months, but it's finally rained these past few days, so that's helping out with the fires. Uh, like it's a very isolated place. This is almost like the planet of Australia. It's we share a lot of things with the West, obviously being part of the Anglosphere, but it really is a very unique place. And I've been all over the world and lived in a lot of places, and I'd say quality of life, Australia probably can't be beaten. But that's you got to cop the good with the bad. We have all these cool things to enjoy, peace and quiet, low crime, all of that kind of stuff. But we're in a nanny state, and we're taxed to the teeth because we have a lot of socialized programs. The government nannies us to make sure we don't draw on those programs.
Well, it's kind of somewhat similar, I guess, to my experience in that I've grown up in the United States my whole life, but I also, kind of grew up outside of it in that I was born and raised in Alaska, which is both geographically and somewhat culturally distinct from what we call the lower 48 states. And there's very much kind of somewhat similar. A lot, people in Alaska, a lot of them moved up post-Vietnam War, and a lot of these areas are just people who want to be left alone, and they moved up there to be left alone. And most people are pretty chill in that way as well, compared to when you go to more established states. Especially on the Eastern Seaboard, but it's very much, it's very similar in that way where, people are, especially, it's slightly different from Australia in that you guys have been a country for a very long time, but, we being a new state, and most people are all transplants, they weren't born there. Everyone's kind of, it's almost like a chosen community versus I was born into it sort of thing. And it is a very unique place in and of itself, but yeah, I don't want to keep you too much longer. We've been going for almost an hour and a half, but yeah, but I appreciate you. I know that you're quite a bit you're in the future from where I'm at, and
but the day's just getting started, so it's fine.
That's a beautiful Bitcoin day, but how can people get a hold of you, consume your content, and be able to get in contact with you?
Yeah, so Twitter, it's Friar Hass, FRIAR HASS, and I've got some links on my Twitter page, I think, but you can also find me on Medium. That's medium.com/@HassMcCook, HASSMCCOOK. So yeah, that's how you can find me. DMs always open, always down for a Bitcoin chat, and yeah, that's about it.
Well, thanks again. I appreciate the time that you spend here, and hopefully we can talk soon.
Oh, that's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.